Ci siamo? Sei partito? Buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti alla nostra finale della 7ª edizione dei campionati in lingua inglese. Saranno 2 finali avvincenti, una per la sezione inglese e una per la sezione italiana. Ho detto 7ª edizione dei campionati nazionali di debate. Abbiamo vissuto 4 giorni intensissimi. I ragazzi che vedete sono praticamente arrivati al loro 9º round di debate in un tempo brevissimo. Le squadre che sono risultate, sono arrivate in finale per la lingua inglese sono l'Istituto Pietro VII di Santeramo in Puglia e il Liceo Monti di Chieri in Piemonte. Adesso vi presento i debater, poi vi presentiamo la giuria e speriamo sia una finale piacevole, avvincente e che siamo contenti di condividere con tutti. Allora, partiamo dalla squadra pro che è stata individuata tramite il sorteggio e lascio la parola alla prima debater per presentarsi. Come sapete i debater sono 3 per la squadra pro e per la squadra contro.
Io sono Gaia Alessandrini e faccio il primo speaker.
Io sono Matilde Viterbo e sono il secondo speaker e faccio anche il reply speech.
Io sono Elena Bruno e farò il terzo speech.
Adesso passiamo a presentare la squadra contro, che sono i 3 debater del liceo Augusto Monti. Scusate, Pietro VII.
Buongiorno a tutti, sono Sciacoveglia Elisabetta e sono la prima speaker della squadra contro e mi occuperò anche della replica.
Buongiorno a tutti, sono Luca Di Toma e sono il secondo speaker della squadra contro.
Buongiorno, sono Calabrese Emiliana e sono la terza speaker della squadra contro.
Grazie mille. Adesso passo la parola al giudice arbitro che seguirà e che farà parte della giuria, il professor Gino Greco, che vi presenta la giuria.
Buongiorno a tutti. Ricordo che oggi la giuria sarà composta da 7 giudici, che invito poi a prendere posto al banco della giuria. Allora, intanto, la professoressa Maria Rosaria Buono, la professoressa Stefania Tallone, Martina Vurro, Luca Amigone, Gianluca Presutti, Fabrizio Thieri e infine io, Gino Greco. Grazie.
Ok, invitiamo i giudici a prendere posizione al tavolo della giuria. Il tema che verrà dibattuto è il seguente: The United Nations Security Council should be abolished in favor of the existence of only the General Assembly as it is now. Non appena la giuria è pronta e dà il là alle squadre, il dibattito inizierà. Buon dibattito a tutti.
Okay. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1, now. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, honorable judges, fellow colleagues from the opposition team, and dear coaches and spectators here. Today we are here to debate the motion. This House believes that the UN Security Council should be abolished in favor of the existence of only the General Assembly as it is now. To explain you what the UN are and how this organization works, we're provided a metaphor. Everyone here, try to imagine a condominium, a big one, with 193 families that every year, as in all condominiums, gather in an assembly. They debate and approve budgets, vote on the president, fight and complain to each other about their neighbors. But in addition to this, there is another assembly, a more stricter and binding one, whose authority is not in question. It is composed by 10 families, established by the assembly that alternate every 2 years. But to this are added 5 families that they always have their place in the council. They're gonna tell you that they built the building, so it's like they own it. They're particular types, so they don't even trust each other. In fact, they established a method according to which if only one of them is opposed to a resolution, this jumps. So, now replace the assembly with the United Nations and family with states, and we are already on track. Moreover, today, with this debate, we will prove you that the Security Council is undemocratic, dangerous, and harmful. And so, for all these reasons, we should abolish it. But move to some definitions essential for our debate today. When we talk about the UN, we are talking about a political and diplomatic organization founded in 1945, and its values should be and are to be based on democracy, ensure international peace and security, and the respect of human rights. When we talk about the UN Security Council, we are talking about an organ composed by 15 members. 5 are permanent and have veto power, and these are China, Russia, USA, Great Britain, and France. The UN Security Council establishes peacekeeping operation, enacts international sanctions, and authorizes military action. And it should do whatever is necessary to maintain international peace and security. When we say that the UN Security Council should be abolished, we mean that the programs and problems faced by the UN Security Council will be directed towards the General Assembly with 3 months' time given for the redistribution and reorganization. When we talk about the UN General Assembly, we're talking about a fully democratic organ when each of the 193 countries have 1 vote. Moving to our team line, we got 3 arguments to prove our ideas today. First one, ineffectiveness of the Security Council, in protecting UN's principles. Secondly, the General Assembly is more democratic and inclusive. And the third one that will be debated by my teammate Matilde, the UN Security Council is obsolete and doesn't fulfill its duty. Moving into my first substantive, try to look at the current situation of our world. We can see many conflicts and violation of human rights. The aim of the Security Council should be, and I underline it should be, to maintain international peace and security. But, as we can see, they're kind of failing. Moreover, we can see a correlation between the World Peace Index and the violation of human rights. So the places where the political situation is more unstable are the places where the human rights are violated most. So this is another evidence that shows how the Security Council is not working and is ineffective right now. An example of this can be the conflict that regards Israel and Palestine. In fact, the Security Council tried to propose some resolutions. Yes, sorry?
Who will have the executive power?
Sorry?
Who will have the executive power of the UN?
No one. Basically, in our model, we can propose to have executive power in the UN Security, in the General Assembly, so no one will have executive power. But we think and we believe that the Security Council is not working, so that not taking binding resolution is better than not acting and working against the global peace and security, as Security Council is doing right now. So, back into my argument, the Security Council tried to propose some resolution to re-establish peace in the Middle East, but the US, that are declared ally of Israel, use their veto to oppose to every substantive resolution. An example of this can be when they ask for the membership of Palestine in the UN. No, sorry. In fact, it could have led to a more open debate with Israel, that is a member of the UN, but US posed its veto. Another example of this was when the United Arab Emirates proposed the ceasefires in the Gaza and bombings and fights against Palestinians. No, sorry. In fact, the US opposed 3 times with its veto. So they took 40 days to take a decision. And in the General Assembly, in our model, they passed the resolution with an overwhelming majority at the first time. So imagine how many lives got losses and how many lives we will continue losing if we do not abolish this committee. No, sorry. So why doesn't it work? The Security Council is as its end tied in every substantial resolution because of the veto power. And this is a vicious cycle of the supremacy of the permanent 5 members in the rest of the world. Now, moving into my second argument about the fact that the General Assembly is more democratic and inclusive. We know that the 5 permanent members have veto right on substantive resolutions. So this can lead to situations where personal interests of a few states prevail over the common good. Whereas in the UNGA, every 190 countries are present and everyone counts the same. Whereas veto right is a problem that gives, a few members significant influence over the organization ability to act and take decisions. So this leads to an imbalancement of the inclusive and democratic nature of the UN. So they are going against the principle of the UN because the UN should guarantee the human rights, but they are not permitting it. We know that the veto right can give this permanent 5 the opportunity to block necessary actions that, for example, in the Syrian war, the neo-government used chemical weapons against during the fight, and this is a violation of human rights. But Russia, that is an ally of the new government of Syria, used 7 times its veto to oppose to any substantive resolution that would have punished this new government. So this is what we can properly call an abuse. So why should you vote for us today? We have proven with our arguments and our example that the abolition could pave the way to greater fairness and democracy, for a broader participation and greater effectiveness, and guarantee a better respect of human rights. Thank you, and we beg you to vote for us.
My speech will start in 3, 2, 1, now. A world torn apart by wars is the world depicted by the proposition team. And we agree, we have problems in our world. But how do they plan on solving it? They just don't, because they want to completely eliminate the executive power from the United Nations. This is what they said. No one will have the executive power. The executive power is absolutely necessary in order to solve world conflicts. What we mean by this is that the executive power for the Security Council means sending peacekeeping operations with blue helmets and also imposing sanctions. And this is crucial for countries to respect the legislation that the General Assembly puts into place. And we will go on to explain this further in our arguments. Also, they talked about how right now the Security Council is, in their opinion, undemocratic and unrepresentative, and that the veto power giving undue deference to just some countries is ineffective. And we agree, the veto power is a problem, but if only the veto power is the problem, why can we not just reform the Security Council instead of eliminating it? And this will be exactly our line. They have not told us one singular actual reason why abolishing is needed and why the reform wouldn't be enough. And this is exactly what we will be supporting. Moreover, they also completely ignoring the fact that major powers in the world need to have more weight. We're not saying that the veto power is the right way, we're saying that the veto power is too much weight, but we will show you how history teaches us that major powers need to be listened in order to, for the world to continue to have peace. Yes?
How would you eliminate veto power?
Okay, so we will eliminate it with the constant pressure that has been put on the countries for decades and decades, both from the outside countries, which are more than 38, and we will show you this, also from an internal member of the PPI, which is France, because Macron has stated that he wants to eliminate the veto power, and also Denis Francis, who is the president of the General Assembly. And with this, I would like to move on exposing our team line. So, a nation has the right to defend itself, but when it comes to the broader issue of peace and security, the legitimacy rests only with the Security Council. Kofi Annan. We are currently living in a world torn apart by wars, where the good of one nation trumps the other nations, from Russia to Palestine to the Congo. The only way to stop such atrocities is through the cooperation of the two most important UN bodies, which are the Security Council, which holds executive power, the only binding power, and the General Assembly, which holds legislative power. Therefore, the only effective way to maintain global peace is through the collaboration of both. The Security Council is the only council in the UN that has binding resolutions, as we said, and it was created after the failure of the League of Nations. The League of Nations was the first international organization with the goal of keeping global peace and security. The reason why it failed was because their supposedly binding resolutions were completely ineffective because they did not put into account the interests of the major powers, such as France and Britain, which were members, but simply were not interested in its resolutions. And, for example, the United States was not even present in the League of Nations. And the Security Council was set up with this precise intention of creating a bond between interests of global powers and ensuring peace. And sure, this not by be the idealistic world we can live in. This is kind of an ugly truth, but it's necessary to talk about it when talking about UN reforms. We cannot just ignore the truth and the reality of the world. No, thank you. Nonetheless, we do recognize a problem in the structure of the United Nations Security Council, and that is veto power. In fact, it is this fact alone that makes the body ineffective, not the body itself, and this is why we are going to just reform it instead of abolishing it. The veto power does not reflect current geopolitical realities and leads to inaction and reluctance to use force and lack of political will. For example, following Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its involvement in the conflict in eastern Ukraine, the Security Council attempted to pass a resolution condemning Russians for its actions and and restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. However, Russia vetoed this resolution, preventing the United Nations Security Council to act. This example shows perfectly how the United Nations Security Council has the right ideas, the right tools that no other body in the whole world has to keep global peace, not even the General Assembly, but the veto power annihilates most efforts to act. Therefore, the Security Council is essential, but in order to fulfill its great potential, its structure needs to change. How? By eliminating the veto power. In this way, the issues that cause ineffectiveness will be solved, since no countries will be able to impose their personal interests over others. As many as 38 nations are calling for the elimination of veto, including Germany, but also France, which currently has veto power, as well as Denis Francis, president of the GA. We also want to maintain the permanent presence of the P5 to avoid the UN failing like the League of Nations, because major powers did not have enough weight, because if we got rid of the Security Council, the major powers would just get out of the United Nations. So we need an incentive for them to stay, and this is how we're giving it to them, giving them permanent seats in the Security Council. What would happen if we were to follow the proposition's proposal? The UN will be left with without an executive power, and the GA legislation will just remain in the air, and it will eliminate the chances of peacekeepers bringing peace, as it has happened. So we should only modify the Security Council because the legislative role depends on the executive role, which is essential to maintain peace, and I will be explaining this point. Secondly, the Security Council is the only body that can provide military action, and thirdly, the elimination of the Security Council would bring grace into our world, and this will be explained by our second speaker. So let's move on explaining how the legislative role depends on the executive one. No, thank you. The situation right now is that the powers of the United Nations are divided between the Security Council, so executive and binding power, and the General Assembly, legislative power. The legislative branch creates laws, and it is the executive branch responsible for enforcing them. The effectiveness of legislation depends solely on how the executive power implements it. The Security Council has the authority to enforce international laws through sanctions and peacekeeping. Without its oversight, the legitimacy and effectiveness of international law will be called into question, leading to a more fragmented and uncertain global framework. The immediate impact that in their world, eliminating the Security Council would be is that the UN will be left without an executive power and without binding resolutions. And the consequence of that is that no legislation will be effective and there will be no enforcement of it. And the absence of the Security Council will lead to a power vacuum in global governments, as there will be no single body with the authority to enforce law, and nations will not have any effective consequences on their actions. What would happen in our world? We would reform the Security Council, and the UN would still have an executive power, and it would actually be more efficient than it is right now, because it wouldn't be blocked by the veto power, and the Security Council would be able to act in more international conflicts, increasing the stability and increasing the chances of bringing peace to the world. And this is why we are so proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1, go. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and dear judges. I'm the second speaker for the proposition team, and I'm here today to present you our third argument, which is the Security Council is obsolete and doesn't fulfill its function, and therefore it should be abolished. Before moving to our first argument, I'd like to rebut some things that the opposition team said today to us. First, they are talking about the fact that the Security Council, it is legally binding, and therefore it is fundamental to keep peace, to maintain peace in our world. But let's look at reality right now. This legally binding, their executive power, is it used correctly? Is it effective the way they're using it? No. Why? Because the Security Council, it's using the executive power to achieve their political and economic interests, and therefore they're not maintaining international peace. And we proved you this with the main example that we've brought about the way that the military action, they also mentioned the fact that military action of the Security Council, since it's an executive power, no thank you, since it is an executive power, it is the only one that can take military action. But is this military action taken by the Security Council right? Is it being used right? No. We proved you with the examples that we've brought that the military action that the Security Council has taken in the times actually caused many more casualties. No, thank you. Many more casualties than the people that they saved. And also, they talked about the fact that the problem is the veto power, not the body itself. But this is not true. The problem is the Security Council. Why? The problem is that the Security Council is a restrictive committee with only 15 members, and that they should represent the entire world. And we were going to prove to you why this is wrong, why this is not effective, and why this is not, no thank you, and why this doesn't work. Also, they talk about the fact that they want to abolish veto, but first of all, how would they want to abolish veto? And second of all, as we said before, it would not solve the problem, because it would still be a restrictive committee of countries that will have to choose to take decisions, to take actions on everyone, on the entire world, and this is not right. And we stand by this. Now we can move to our argument, which I repeat is the fact that the Security Council... yes, please.
So are you aware of the fact that the Security Council has only 15 members in order to be able to take decisions extremely rapidly because they handle conflicts and wars?
Yes, we know that, but is it really is it really more important to make faster decisions or right decisions? I think that we all know the answer, and the answer is that it is more important to make the right decision. And we saw that the way they took the decision, so in a faster way, it actually caused more casualties than people that were saved. Thank you for your POIs. Now we can move to the argument. So the Security Council is obsolete and does not fulfill its function. Why is this important? First of all, because if the Security Council is no longer fit to represent the current geopolitical situation of our world, and this is why it's obsolete. And secondly, because the Security Council does not fulfill the function it was funded for. Let's start with the first point, the fact that the Security Council is obsolete.
POI?
No, thank you. The Security Council was founded after World War II with the aim of ensuring international peace. Let's keep this in mind. It was founded by the five permanent members that fought against the Nazi threat, because they were the most powerful countries in the world at that moment. Keep in mind that moment, because this is fundamental. Because what is the problem? The problem is that the Security Council holds the powers and still takes decisions concerning everyone else in the whole world. But the problem is that the world changed. The political scenario changed too. The 5 permanent members do not represent our current... No, thank you. They do not represent our current geopolitical situation. They only represent an old one. And this is fundamental, because it means they do not have the right to represent our entire world. Also, they are not taking consideration the fact that these 5 countries, the 5 permanent countries, are not the only powerful one anymore, because, as we said before, the world changed. In fact, for instance, we have Germany, a very powerful country that grown in many aspects, economically and also in other many aspects. But this is not taken in consideration. Germany is not taken in consideration to be one of the 5 permanent members, even if it's a very important country in our world. So they do not represent our world. No, thank you. They do not represent our world anymore, and therefore they do not have the right to do so. So now we can move to the second point, which I remind you to be the Security Council does not fulfill its duty, does not fulfill its function. As we said before, what is the role of the Security Council? To ensure international peace. They promised to us, they promised to the people, to everyone that's here, audience, that we would have to put our lives into their hands. We in this room trust the Security Council, but what is the Security Council doing to us now? They're not fulfilling their duty. They are not working, no thank you. They're not working together to achieve the common good. They're not working together to ensure international peace. Instead, they are only putting their own interest in they're only putting their own interest in exchange of people's life, in exchange of our lives, and this cannot be accepted, dear judges. And moreover, they're putting their economic and political interest first. And these 5 members, they are corrupted. They are corrupted against each other. And they have enemies between these 5 members. They are enemies and they have allies. And this does not work. Why? Opposition might say that it is not true. No, thank you. That the Security Council works because when there's a country in the Security Council that is directly involved in a war or something that is putting at risk international peace, they cannot vote to oppose or to propose. But this is not true. This does not work, because in the 5 members of the Security Council, there are many, many allies. Let's make a simple example. We know that China is a Russian's ally, right? Yes. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, what
PI.
happened? No, thank you. What happened? China has not condemned Russian invasion. They did not. And not only that, they have abstained from votes to stop Russia. And also, the Security Council put economic sanctions in order to fight against Russia. And what happened? Chinese companies, they kept and keep working nowadays with Russian industry, with Russian companies. So what is this saying to us? It is saying to us that the people who should protect us, they are not, because they're putting their own interests first. They are not taking in consideration the fact there are people dying in the war between Ukraine and Russia, and they're only caring about their political and economic interests. So what have I told you so far? I've told you that the five members of the Security Council itself, they only use their power, and the 5 members, they only use their veto powers in order to pursue their own economic and political interests. And so, for all these reasons, dear judges, we beg you to vote for us. Thank you so much.
Just a second. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. I'll start from a contradiction from proposition side made by the first speaker. In fact, they have made a change of theme line during their speech. Firstly, she said that the Security Council powers would be shifted to the General Assembly. But this would not be possible because otherwise the General Assembly wouldn't be as it is now, as the motion says. And secondly, in response to my POI, she said that no one would hold the executive power. But what's the problem with it? The problem is that legislative power works only if only with the executive power, because laws, as for your definition of General Assembly, needs to be made respected. But the General Assembly does not have the powers in order to make them respected. Why? Because it does not hold the executive power. What does the executive power mean? It means binding resolutions and, for example, the force that are the blue helmets. So it cannot be effective, your model. Why? Because it doesn't have executive power in order to make your legislation be put in place. Second point, they have characterized the Security Council as ineffective due to the veto power. But what is our side? We do agree with you. So seeing that we would remove as well the veto power, we're solving the problem in the same way. So there is no reason why we should abolish the Security Council. And apart from it, we're also proving you that the Security Council does have some benefits. Yes.
Don't you think that even if you abolish the veto power, the Security Council remains a restricted council that is not democratic?
Yeah, sure, but we need to have a restricted number of seats. Why? Because in order to face the emergencies, such as a war, we actually do need to have urgent resolutions. In fact, we cannot wait 2 years. That is the time needed for a resolution by the General Assembly in order to face that war. In fact, in those 2 years, too much people would have been killed. But also, apart from the limited number of seats, it is also efficiency. Why? Because it is representative. In fact, in these 15 seats, we will still have the P5, which are 5 between the most important global countries, and the other 10 are non-consecutive terms that are rotating from countries and that do represent their continents. In fact, there are permanent seats, for example, for Africa and for Asia, for America.
POI.
No, thank you. Last point of my rebuttal is about the fact that the Security Council is deemed to be obsolete. But you're depicting an utopic world, so let's see what would happen if we abolished the Security Council. The P5 would have no incentive to stay in the United Nations anymore. Why? Let's see what happened to after the World War I. No, thank you. With the League of Nations. The League of Nations, which was a sort of prototype of the United Nations, failed. Why? Because those countries, those relevant countries, did not have weight, and so they left the League of Nations. The League of Nations failed, and this brought to not having an international organization in order to prevent the World War II. What is outside? They would still have incentive because they hold permanent power. So now let's move on to my argumentation part.
POI.
No, thank you. My second argument is the United Nations Security Council is the only one that can provide military action. In fact, unfortunately, diplomacy alone cannot be effective. It cannot be able to solve conflicts. Why? Because Blue Helmets army are a necessary evil in order to maintain global peace. And here I'll show you why. For instance, let's think about the Cambodian-Vietnamese war. What happened? The UN was able to restore peace, leading to a new constitution of Cambodia, thanks to 16,000 peacekeepers that made and created the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia. So they resolved the situation. And the same happened, for example, in Sierra Leone, because the United Nations mission in Sierra Leone was a peacekeeping operation, and what were its positive, no thank you, effects? Protect civilians from the threat of physical violence. So actually, the executive power was needed and was effective. The problem is that while it has many times succeeded, and this is a good thing, other times it has not been able to reach this, for example, being deployed. Why? Because of the veto power. And seeing that we are removing the veto power as well, there's no other reason why we should abolish the United Security Council. So now let's see what happens if we were to eliminate the Security Council. We've demonstrated that even with the problematic structure, we do have positive impacts by, for example, the Blue Helmets, as happened in Cambodia and the Sierra Leone. No, thank you. But because the peacekeepers cannot be sent by the GA, but only by the Security Council. Why? Because in order to deploy this Blue Helmets, we do need to have the executive power, and in their world, no one is going to hold it. What about if we were to follow our proposal? Now, it has already done some good, the United Nations Security Council, as it is now, with some problems in the structure. But imagine what would be the impact of removing the veto, which is the unique problem we are discussing today about the Security Council. Well, the conflicts would be solved with much more ease, because there would not be any more partisan interests of the P5s, and also again, the unique problem that makes UNSC and UN Security Council inefficient is veto. We're removing it, so there's no reason why we should eliminate the Security Council. Let's move on to the third. No, thank you. Let's move on to the third argument. That is, the elimination of the Security Council will bring chaos into our world. So, what would happen if we were to eliminate it? Well, the immediate consequences of this elimination would be that the existence of a United Nations without any executive power and without a militia. So, what would a world like this look like? A world where the UN lacks executive power. Imagine the General Assembly making it illegal to use guns globally, but America does not adhere because there's no legally binding solution. Why? Because the General Assembly cannot put it. So what happens if America does not adhere? Well, it will continue to break undisturbed law. And so seeing that this is done from America, even other major countries will do it, because there will be no incentive to follow a rule that is not followed, for example, by America. And so this will bring to legislative anarchy, because no one is going to follow the General Assembly legislations. What would happen if we were to eliminate the force, so the Blue Helmets? Imagine that between Algeria and Morocco, a war erupts. if a war broke out between the two nations, the UN would not possess any militia, any force in order to intervene in the conflict. What are the consequences? Well, this would make it impossible and would make endless the conflict. Why? Because we are talking about now diplomatic anarchy, as any nation could start a war without the UN intervening, and the UN is needed to intervene because, as happened for example, for the Egypt-Israel conflict in 1980s, the UN peacekeeping mission has permitted to demilitarize the Sinai Peninsula and avoid an escalation between Egypt Israel. So, as mentioned earlier, for example, in Sierra Leone, these blue helmets have resolved the conflict. So again, in their proposal, blue helmets cannot be deployed, and this is disastrous because blue helmets have concretely and actually helped in order to solve many conflicts. So the world that proposition team is proposing is a world where both powers are eliminated because legislation cannot work without executive power, and executive power does not exist in their world. So in their world, every action is allowed and there are no real consequences. Do we want to live in such a world? Well, team opposition does not. Thank you.
Okay, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1, now. Okay, good morning, dear judges, fellow opposition team, dear spectators and coaches. Today we're here to debate the motion why the UN Security Council should be abolished in favor of the existence of only the General Assembly as it is now. First of all, I'd like to go over again the definition that our first speaker gave about abolishing. They said that we stated we would give powers to the General Assembly that are now in the hands of the Security Council. Have we stated that? Absolutely not. We just said that abolished would be that the Security Council would stop existing, but the programs, not powers, programs, and problems faced by the Security Council would be directed towards the General Assembly, with a 3 months given for the redistribution and reorganization. So we have to really focus on what we said and not say different things that we haven't mentioned. Then we like to focus on what the motion is. The motion is not about the veto power, no thank you, as they are making it right now. It is about abolishing the Security Council as itself. We're talking about the Security Council as an organ, not just the veto power. But we will also preview why abolishing veto power will not solve the problems that we have in the status quo. No, thank you. So let's look at one of the main points that the opposition team said that I would like to rebut. They said that the Security Council is important because it's the only one that has actual executive power. But one, is this executive power working? Is this being used correctly? Absolutely not. We can see as many examples that we brought you about all the wars and conflicts that you all know about that are going on in the world right now. Violation of human rights. No, thank you. They're making people die and suffer all over the world. Why does the UN exist? To protect global peace. Is this happening? No. That is because of the Security Council that I will show you also is going against some of the UN Charter points. So it's actually so damaging, and abolishing veto power will not be able to solve all of, no thank you, all of that. Also, how is this executive power being used? Is it even effective? For example, let's say Russia was sanctioned because it's going against the resolution that the, no thank you, Security Council proposed. Russia is not obeying to what the Security Council proposed itself. But are they doing something about it? No, they're just paying and going on with all the harm that they're causing. It's just paying for something that you're doing, going to solve the problem. No, they don't care about it. They only care about the economical interest that they have in the conflicts.
So we can see how this executive power is causing more harm because the Security Council caused some good effects. It had them, yes, with the blue helmet intervention in some conflicts, but there are many conflicts that are not being talked about, that are not being intervened in, and that are actually being worsened by the Security Council itself. And this is something that us as proposition team find absolutely outrageous. So also, doing bad decision better than doing slower and more effective and global and democratic decision that would be universal, more efficient, that would draw a path to go? We think so. And also, I would like for this cause to bring you an example, about what Weekly Haley said. Weekly is an ambassador of the UN that proposed to the Security Council to add to the Security Council agenda human rights. This decision to add to the Security Council agenda human rights was posed veto power by Russia and China. Is it acceptable that the same country that should protect us are actually going against? They do not want human rights to be implemented in the council and in the organ that should be the one to protect them. The Security Council is going against the own reason why it was created. It's causing way more harm than what actually is causing to be good.
POI.
Yes, thank you.
Are you aware of the fact that you've characterized the unique problem as veto power? We're removing it, so there is no reason why we should abolish Security Council.
I will also show you why abolishing the veto power will not be solving the problem at all. So I will go through that too. The problems are the permanent members that you said would still be permanent members in the Security Council. And the thing is because the Security Council revolves around them, does not have the right to exist. Why? Because as I've shown you, the permanent members are going against human rights, therefore they do not have the right to have this power that they detain right now. And also, removing veto power be an effective move in that? No, they would still have power and influence, as they would also cause corruption. Maybe the veto wouldn't work, but they would make other countries vote for them to have a majority of the votes to achieve the same outrageous decision that they are being made right now, today. Do you feel represented by some countries that go against your own human rights? We do not at all. So I'd like to go over again some of the points that us as a proposition team made. First of all, we talked about how the Security Council is ineffective in its aim of protecting UN principles, and that with or without veto power does not change, and how it's violating human rights and not solving the problem that it was made to create, but make it even worse. Why it is democratic and inclusive and would give voices to the General Assembly states to talk about the security matters that now are only being talked about and approved in the Security Council. So all countries would have a voice, would have something that they can say about the security matters that are now only being handled by the Security Council. And are they being handled right? We don't think so. Also, the Security Council is obsolete. As we said, the permanent five do not represent the current world asset. They don't fulfill their function. They go against human rights. The world has changed. There are other powerful countries that could be represented more in the General Assembly than there right now in the Security Council, as the opposition team has proposed. So. Also, the 5 permanent members weren't elected. They chose themselves. Why do they have the right to choose themselves if they're going against the same UN charter? We do not find reason for that to be right, to be true. Also, we have to keep one thing in mind. When you take part of the United Nations, you are signing a charter. This charter says that it's your duty, and you put all your duties in order to respect all the deliberations that are made by the General Assembly and all the things that the United Nations say. So addressing the problem publicly in the General Assembly would actually make it be better to give voices to countries and to also make responsible the countries that are now harming all of our world balances. And also, it's the duty of countries to respect the things that the United Nations say. So, for all of these reasons, we believe that it is better to have maybe a slower but way more representative, way more right things to say than make wrong decisions that are going against the UN itself. Thank you so much for your attention. I beg you to vote for proposition team today.
So, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1, now. Dear judges, I want to ask you a question. Do we want to live in a world where the UN is left at the mercy of a cruel world where all form of anarchy prevail? Where the UN is useless because its laws cannot be enforceable in any way and because it cannot protect world peace? The word proposed by team in favor of the motion is one where every action is allowed and where there are no real consequences. So, in real life, your side of the house is the one where the objective of the UN is not respected. Who would want to live in such a world? Certainly not team opposition, and neither would you, dear judges. Instead, our word is a word with representation, effective laws, and a useful militia. So, now, I would like to state that the only problem that they characterized during the entire debate is the problem of veto power. And they did not state one time why abolishing veto power is enough. You did not mechanize one time why. You did not even ask yourself why abolishing veto power is not enough. You did not state it one time, and we take notes. So now I would like to divide my speech in 3 main parts. The first one about feasibility, the second one about efficiency, and we'll talk about how the legislative and executive power need to work together, and finally we will talk about the abolishing of the veto power. Now, let's focus on feasibility. It was clear in all of our speeches what history is. History states that, no thank you, the League of Nations ceased to exist because the major power didn't have the incentive to remain there because their interests were not respected. So on your side of the house, actually, the UN will cease to exist. It is a world where the UN ceases to exist, more democratic than a world where the UN exists. We have a Security Council without veto power and also a General Assembly that works. So all of your arguments actually fall on our side. Now, let's ask ourselves, what will happen if all of the major powers will exit the UN? No, thank you. First of all, also Italy and all the Occidental countries will leave. Why? Because we all follow what America does. Why? Of course, because of history and what we have understood after World War II and all of our intention. So, no thank you. And also, I would like to state how no politician ever has ever proposed your proposal, while our proposal was proposed by 38 nations plus the president of the GA, but also Macron itself, that is one that has the veto power. Therefore, eliminating the veto power is the most feasible thing, and your side of the house actually doesn't have one person on their favor. Yes.
Didn't you say that abolishing the Security Council would cause the permanent member not to collaborate? How in your world would they still collaborate without the veto power?
Because they remain to be P5. In your word, the America and China and Russia do not have a specific voice. In our side of the house, because we maintain the P5, they have it. Therefore, they have enough incentive to remain there. In your side of the house, there is not even one incentive to remain in the UN Security Council and in the UN in general. Therefore, why would they remain in the UN? There's no one single reason why, and you didn't brought that because there is no one single right thing to say about that. So, now, I would like to focus, after I've explained the history, I would like to focus on the efficiency. What about efficiency? You stated that one of the problems of the Security Council is there being formed of 15 countries. But why? in the origin, was formed by 15 countries. Because the iter for the legislation for any law in the UN takes from 1.5 year to 2 years. Do you think that you can intervene in a word after 2 years? We actually do not think so, of course, because a word is a matter of seconds. You cannot wait 193 nations to have the majority of votes. You need to pass any legislation in the General Assembly 2/3 of the vote. 2/3 of the votes means that they can vote even 10, 11 times for a legislation to pass. Can we wait 10 times for a legislation to pass when people are dying in wars? We actually do not think so. And this, as we explained, has worked time and times again during history, for example, with the Cambodian War or in Sierra Leone. And it is worked with the veto power. Imagine what would happen without the veto power. So again, this point goes to us. And they also stated that the Security Council will remain without an executive power. My first speaker has brilliantly explained, no thank you, how all of nation work and every organization works with the separation of power. We need executive power to put legislation into effect. How do you think that a legislation can be put into effect if there is no executive power that holds it? If there is no executive power, every legislation would not have any consequence. Therefore, any nation could do whatever they want, so the UN would just be useless. Why do we need, no thank you, why do we need some legislation that will never be put into place? The GA, not only the Security Council in your side of the house will cease to exist, but also the GA will become useless and the whole UN will cease to exist, not only for the incentive of the nation, but also because there is no one single laws that can be put into place in your side of the house. And this was explained brilliantly by my previous teammates. So, how do you believe to put legislation into place? Of course, you can't. But also, you talked about democracy. First of all, saying that the UN is anti-democratic is going against history because the UN was created to protect democracy. Therefore, looking at history, we can say that the UN is absolutely democratic. Why? First of all, because we have the GA with 193 countries, but also because the Security Council doesn't have 15 powers that are always present. We have a vote to say who 10 countries are going to be in the Security Council. Therefore, if there is a vote, it is democratic, of course. So, also, this point goes on our side of the house. And again, now I would like to talk about the veto power and abolishing veto power. First of all, I would like the only problem they brought to us is veto. So, why should we abolish no thank you, the Security Council if we can just reform it? So, basically, you are proposing a word to us where there is no Security Council. And you are proposing to us a word where the Security Council ceases to exist in favor of the General Assembly as it is now. We have just explained to you how there would be no executive power. Therefore, there would be a lot of negative consequences. On our side of the world, instead, we only have benefits because the only problem that exists right now is veto power. We resolve it. You, instead, do not resolve the problem, but also create even more problem. Therefore, waiting the two words we have presented to you, actually, all of the points brought by proposition team actually falls on opposition side. So, they did not state one singular time why abolishing is enough. Instead, we presented throughout all of our lives how it is enough. So, actually, I would like to state again how no one in the world right now talks about their proposal because again, it is impossible to think that we can eliminate a body of the United Nations that has existed for so many years and that has worked so many years even with the problem of veto. The moment in which we eliminate veto, we eliminate the only problem present in the UN. Therefore, the UN will be more efficient, perfect, and will actually work even better than it is doing right now. The word they are proposing to us is a word where we will have, again, a League of Nations. They say that our side of the house is obsolete. But actually, what is obsolete is their side of the house, because they are proposing only the GA. That is exactly what the League of Nations was. Therefore, they are just proposing something that failed at one time. Why should we create a failing thing a second time? There is not one singular reason to why it should exist. For all of this reason, we are so proud of oppose because we actually believe that our side of the house is the more democratic one, is the one that we have a word with representation, effective laws, and useful mediation. And us, as opposition team, actually believe that no legislation can be put with executive power. Therefore, their word does not have any consequence to any action, and any worse is possible. Thank you.
My speech will start in 3, 2, 1, now. Dear judges, let me walk you through the course of this debate, highlighting what the main points of clash were. Starting off with the executive power. We have shown how executive power is essential, whilst the other team wants to completely abolish it from the United Nations. We have shown how the executive power is essential and it is the only way to make the legislative powers of the General Assembly, which is the body that they are putting all their money on, in order for the legislation to be enforced and actually effective and be respected by all other countries. And also we have highlighted how the peacekeeping operations, therefore executive power, were essential in certain situations to solve world conflicts, for example in Sierra Leone and Cambodia, as exposed by our second speaker. Moving on to the other points of clash, which is the contrast between abolishing and reforming. I'm going to say again how the proposition team has never actually showed us how there is a need for abolish and why, in fact, reforming is actually enough. In fact, we have shown how the Security Council, it's not perfect. There are problems because sometimes there is inaction, but this inaction, and both teams agreed on during the debate, was due to the veto power of the P5. They were blocking certain resolutions for their personal interest. But this is exactly how we are going to solve it, by eliminating the veto power, which is the only source of problems in the Security Council. While instead, they have not shown us how the abolishment would be justified. While we believe that the Security Council being abolished would be disastrous. And they stated, and we have shown them how they have stated multiple times, again, so many problems with inactions, but they have only made this inaction responsible, responsible of the inaction, the veto power, as we also state. So we have no idea why during this debate the Security Council should be abolished. And then I would like to talk about efficiency. In fact, the proposition team has told us how the Security Council is undemocratic and underrepresented, but our teams has shown how it's not actually this way, because every continent has assured seats that change in rotation of 2 years. And it's not undemocratic, but it needs to be restricted, as we've shown, because the Security Council deals with extremely bad situations, such as conflicts and wars that need to be resolved fast. Lastly, in the efficiency point, we also want to highlight how abolishing the Security Council would lead to the major powers actually leaving due to historical precedents. In fact, we have told them, we have shown them how they are, the proposition team is depicting an utopistic world that does not take into account the history of the League of Nations, because in their world, the history would just repeat itself, because there will be no incentive for the P5 to remain in the General Assembly, which will lead, as it had done during World War I and World War II, to them leaving and causing more instability and terrible consequences. Instead, the opposition team is proposing a realistic world that would, and we would better the world we're living in right now. Instead, they're living in a completely different world by solving the huge problem that both teams highlighted, which is the veto power blocking resolution in conflicts. And by and the opposition team, by eliminating this veto, is resolving this problem and efficiently tackling peace. Thank you.
Okay, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1, go. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and dear judges. We have come to the end of today's debate, and I'm here to show you what the outcome actually is. Let's start by saying this. We, as the proposition team, stand with the idea that we should abolish the Security Council because it has no right to exist, since it is not fulfilling its duty and it's using the executive power to achieve their own interest. So, let's start with the main clashes of today's debate. We have democracy, the abolishing the veto powers versus the Security Council, the executive power, and the values that were brought. These were the main clashes of today's debate. Let's start with the first one, democracy, because we as proposition team and them as the opposition team clearly have two different views of what democracy is, of what a democratic institution is. Because in their arguments, they were talking about the fact that the Security Council is democratic because they represent the world. Why? Because they represent bloc. But we proved you that it is not true, because the Security Council does not represent the countries, and moreover, they are not chosen to do so. So is that democracy? Do we know what the definition of democracy is? I bet we all know the answer. Then we can move to the second clash, that is Security Council versus the veto power. Not only we proved you that logically the abolition of veto power that the opposition team brought to us today does not work in their world, we also proved to you why the real problem is the Security Council itself, and of course also the veto power, but it's all together, because the Security Council does not fulfill its duty, and because it is not inclusive and it does not represent the whole world. In fact, with this clash, it's linked to the other clash, that is the executive power, because one of their main argumentation was the fact that Security Council have executive power and therefore they shouldn't be abolished. But let's look at the world right now, how it is. Is this executive power used right? Is this executive power doing something good? No. We proved you with many, many examples that the casualties and the damages that the executive power of the Security Council is bringing to our world are way worse than the benefits they've brought you. And moreover, the executive power that they are using, it is used only to achieve their own interests. And therefore, they do not have the right to exist. And lastly, we can move to the last clash, that is values, that we're going to present you with two scenarios. Let's look at their scenarios, the opposition scenarios. They want to live in a world where corruption is leading the decision of our world, where there's a institution that is not democratic, that it was not chosen to represent the whole world, that should take the decision for us, for the people. They live also in a fairy tale, because they do not acknowledge the fact that the reason why the Security Council does not work, the reason why there are many wars in our world, is because of the Security Council, because they can't stop the war that they are causing because of veto powers, and because they're putting their own interest first. Whereas in our world, in our scenarios, we care more about what do we value more? We value equality. We value justice. We value human rights, and therefore they shouldn't be. This is the best scenario possible, because which scenario sounds better for you in the audience? Every one of you. Everyone in this room, what do you value more? Your human rights and your right to be represented by every single member, every single country in the whole world, or by a restrictive and corrupted institution? I bet we all know the answer, and for this reason, we beg you to vote for us today, proposition team.
Ringraziamo le squadre del liceo Monti di Chieri e dell'Istituto Pietro VII di Sant'Eramo per l'avvincente dibattito che ci hanno regalato. Per l'avvincente dibattito che ci hanno regalato. Il risultato del dibattito sarà disponibile, perché la giuria si deve ritirare, sarà disponibile poi sul sito e sui canali social di Debate Italia. Grazie di nuovo, invito le squadre a stringersi la mano.